Welcome to the Spanish Language Lab with me, Alexander. Today, we're going to be practicing our listening and reading comprehension skills in Spanish by reading a chapter from the novel Fight Club. The reason why I'm choosing Fight Club for this video is because Fight Club has a very simple and concise writing style at both the sentence and paragraph level, and the chapters are really short. Today's chapter, chapter 14, is only 2 pages long, making it ideal for this video format. Second, I think Fight Club is a fantastic, fascinating story that I want to share with all of you. And lastly, as a point of reference, I think that if you're at the B1 level and above in your level of Spanish mastery, I think you're gonna get a lot out of this book. If you're in the A levels, this might be a little above your weight class, but I say give it a shot anyways and see how far along you can go. The only way we can ever get better is by stepping outside of our comfort zone and challenging ourselves. And the last thing I'll say is I won't be reading out of the paperback itself, but out of a PDF, and I'll be including a link to a free PDF of the Spanish translation of Fight Club in the video notes below. It's the same PDF I'm using for this video, so go ahead and use that. It's a free resource I give to all of you, the people. So, one more thing. First, I'll be reading through chapter 14, and then I'll be circling back and analyzing what we read, the grammar, the vocabulary, and just analyzing it in general. So that's how this video is formatted. And without further ado, pow, let's get started. All right. Capítulo 14, El Club de la Lucha. And we're going to start right here. Por eso yo apreciaba tantos los grupos de apoyo, porque la gente, cuando cree que te estás muriendo, te presta toda su atención. Si aquella podía ser la última vez que estuvieran contigo, estaban contigo de verdad. Todo lo demás, el saldo del blanco, el saldo del banco, las canciones de la radio o el pelo alborotado, cacería de importancia. Te dedicaban toda su atención. La gente te escuchaba en vez de estar pendiente de su turno para hablar. Y cuando hablaban, no te contaban ninguna historia. Al conversar, iban constituyendo algo que los transformaba en seres diferentes. Marla había empezado a ir a los grupos de apoyo cuando descubrió el primer bulto. La mañana siguiente del día siguiente al que descubriéramos su segundo bulto, Marla entró brincando en el cocina con las dos piernas metidas en una media y dijo, mira, soy una sirena. Marla dijo, no es como cuando los tíos os sentáis al revés en el retrato y hacéis como que vais en moto. Este es un accidente de verdad. Justo antes de conocernos en Aún Hombres Unidos, apareció el primer bulto. Ahora tenía otro más. Lo que debéis saber es que Marla sigue viva. La filosofía de Marla respecto a la vida, me dijo, es que puede morirse en cualquier momento. La tragedia de su vida es que no se muere. Cuando Marla descubrió el primer bulto, fue a una clínica donde madres con sumidas como espantapájaros se sentaban en sillas de plástico o los tres lados de la sala de espera con niños desmadejados como peleles y hechos un ovillos en su regazo, o reclinados a sus pies. Los niños tenían los ojos hundidos y oscuros como cuando se pudre la piel de una naranja o un plátano se va sumiendo en la carne, y las madres se rascaban levantándose capaz de caspa en infecciones incontrolables del cuero cabelludo. De la misma forma que los, de la misma forma en que los hospitales, los dientes de los pacientes parecen enormes en los rostros delgados. Sus dientes son solo fragmentos de hueso que sobresalen de la piel para triturar alimentos. Aquí es donde acabas cuando no tienes seguro de enfermedad. Antes de que se supiera más sobre el tema, hubo un montón de homosexuales que quisieron tener niños, y ahora los niños están enfermos o las madres se están muriendo y los padres han muerto, y sentada en el hospital entre el olor vomitivo a pies y a vinagre. Mientras una enfermera le pregunta a cada madre cuánto hace que está enferma y cuánto peso ha perdido, y si el niño y si el niño tiene algún pariente vivo o un tu- turo. Turo. Marla dice que no. Si se iba a morir, Marla no quería saberlo. Marla dobló la esquina de la clínica en dirección a la lavandería y robó todos los vaqueros de las secadoras. Luego se fue caminando hasta una tienda donde le dieron 15 pavos por cada par. A continuación, Marla se compró unas medias de las buenas, de las que no hacen carreras. Hasta las medidas buenas que no hacen carreras, dice Marla, se enganchan. Nada es estático, todo se destruye. Marla comenzó a ir a los grupos de apoyo porque era más fácil estar con escoria humana. Todos padecían algún mal, y durante un rato, en la pantalla del monitor cardíaco, la línea de su corazón aparecía plana. Marla cogió un trabajo que consistía en preparar funerales por adelantado para una casa de pompas fúnebres, donde algunos hombres gordos, pero sobre todo mujeres gordas, salían de la salsa de exposición con una urna crematoria del tamaño de una huevera, y Marla sentada en el despacho del recibidor con el pelo negro recogido y las medias con enganchones y un bulto en el pecho y un destino funesto. Les decía, señora, no se engañe. En esa urna diminuta no cabría ni siquiera su cabeza. Vuelva dentro y escoja una urna del tamaño de un balón. El corazón de Marla tenía el mismo aspecto que mi cara. La inmundicia y la escoria del mundo. Escoria humana postconsumista de nadie se preocuparía jamás de reciclar. Entre los grupos de apoyo y la clínica de me dijo Marla, había conocido a mucha gente que ahora estaba muerta. Personas que estaba, personas que estaban criando malvas y que la llamaban de noche por teléfono. Marla se iba de bares y cuando el camarero gritaba su nombre y ella atendía la llamada, la línea se había cortada. En aquellos tiempos pensaba que estaba tocando fondo. Cuando tienes 24 años, dice Marla, no tienes idea de cuán bajo puedes caer, pero aprendí rápido. La primera vez que Marla rellenó una urna crematoria, no se puso la mascarilla y más tarde se soñó la nariz y el pañuelo se tiñó de negro con los restos del señor Sutano. En la casa de Paper Street, si el teléfono suena una sola vez y lo coges y la línea se ha cortado, sabes que es alguien que intenta contactar con Marla. Ocurre más veces de las que te imaginas. Un inspector de policía empezó a llamar a la casa de la calle Paper Street por la explosión de mi apartamento. Tyler se ponió a mi lado, apoyaba el pecho contra mi espalda y me susurraba al odio mientras aten- yo atendía al teléfono con el audio libre y el inspector me preguntaba si conocía a alguien que supiera fabricar dinamita casera. El desastre es una parte natural de mi evolución hacia la tragedia y la disolución, susurraba Tyler. Le dije al inspector que fue la nevera la que volvó el apartamento por los aires. Estoy rompiendo las ataduras a la fuerza física y las posesiones terrenas, susurraba Tyler. Ya que solo mediante a la autodestrucción llegaré a descubrir el poder superior del espíritu. La dinamita, dijo el inspector, tenía impurezas, residuos de aoxlato de amoníaco y percloruro potásico que hacían suponer que la bomba era casera y co- y el cerrojo de seguridad de la puerta de entrada estaba destrozado. I am struggling with this chapter a bit, so, but we're almost done. Oh no, le dije que aquella noche estaba en Washington, D.C. El inspector de teléfono me explicó que alguien había rociado el cerejo de seguridad con un bote de freón y que luego lo había golpeado con un cincel frío para romper el cilindro. Así es como roban bicicletas los delincuentes. El redentor que destruya mis propiedades, dice Tyler, está luchando por salvar mi espíritu. El maestro que logre apartar las posesiones de mi camino me liberará. El inspector dijo que quien quiera que hubiese puesto la dinamita casera podía haber abierto el gas y apagado las llamas piloto de horno días antes de que se produjera la explosión. El gas fue solo el detonante. Tuvieron que pasar días antes de que el gas llenara el apartamento y alcanzase el compresor situado en la base de la nevera y el motor eléctrico del compresor provocara la explosión. I'm struggling with this chapter, but that's fine. That's why we're here. It's to learn. Dile que sí, susurra Tyler, que lo hiciste tú, que tú volaste la casa. Es lo que quiere oír. Le digo al inspector que no. No dejé el gas abierto y después me fui de la ciudad. Amaba mi vida. Amaba el apartamento, amaba cada una de los muebles, eran mi vida. Todo, las lámparas, las sillas, las alfombras eran parte de mí. Los platos de los armarios eran parte de mí. Las plantas eran parte de mí. La televisión era parte de mí. Fui yo quien volvió por los aires. ¿No se daba cuenta? El inspector me dijo que no abandonara la ciudad. He wasn't buying it. He wasn't buying it. All right, so there's really only two things I want to take a look at in the analytical section of this video. And it's not grammar this time. It's not vocabulary. It's reading comprehension. It's the plot. It's the ideas being communicated in this awesome novel. So in the last chapter, chapter 13, that was when Marla was doing a breast check in the morning and she thought she felt a lump. So she asked our main character, who is in fact Tyler Durden, but at this point in the novel, he doesn't know he's Tyler Durden. So he asks our anti-hero to come by and check her breast to get a second opinion, basically. And she didn't want to go to a doctor because she can afford it. And if you can't afford medical insurance, you don't pay for a doctor unless you're pretty sure you have something wrong with you so that you get your money's worth. Now, I want to contrast that with what we are reading here. So what I have highlighted here is la filosofía de Marla respecto a la vida, me dijo, es que puede morirse en cualquier momento. La tragedia de su vida es que no se muere. What does that mean? Marla, as far as I can tell, is a straight up pessimist. Okay? She is a representative of pessimist philosophy, right? And if you want to know what pessimism is, just think of this famous quote by, I think, a Polish artist. He, I think the quote goes, "Life is a sexually transmitted disease with no known cure, and the no, it's yeah, life is a sexually transmitted disease with no known cure, and it always ends in death." Which is kind of a, it's not, it's true from a pessimistic point of view. Life is sexually transmitted. You can't give life unless you have sex and you pregnate a woman, and then you give, and then and then life comes out, baby comes out. So life is sexually transmitted, but the pessimism is the disease. It's like, oh, life is cruel, life is a disease. Um, and I think that's communicated here. And that her philosophy is that we could die any moment, but the tragedy is that we don't. The tragedy is we have to keep living through this prison of flesh and bones. We have to put up with this prison known as life. And the contrast here is in the previous chapter where she was like, oh no, I might have a breast lump. Oh no, I might be sick. Um, so do you want to die or don't you want to die? And then a couple chapters ago, 2 or 3 or 4, Marla was in her hotel and she took a bunch of like painkillers or sleeping medication, and if she fell asleep she was gonna die. And so she called Tyler and said, hey, I need you to help me. This is it's not like a real suicide, it's more like a call for help. And so Marla is, and isn't a she's struggling through life. She has a lot to be sad about, but her philosophy isn't helping her out either. She doesn't have a philosophy of self empowerment. She has a philosophy of self negation, right? The Schopenhauer philosophy. The life is a prison, and I'm just going to view the bad in everything. And in a word, it's pessimistic. And so that's what Marla represents here. But the contradiction is that she didn't want to die she feared dying when she got that lump. And maybe it's not the fear of death, maybe it's the suffering part. Nobody wants to suffer. And so it's often said that people who commit suicide don't actually want to end their life, they just want to end the suffering. And so that's what I want to point out about Marla here and what she's given voice to in this novel, at least in this chapter, or at least in this book so far. The second thing I want to point out is this last paragraph. It makes me kind of chuckle every time I read it, every time I hear it in the movie. Um, so the main character, our anti-hero, gets a call from an inspector from the police department and starts asking him questions like, hey, we noticed there's like a fuse that was lit, or like a pilot light behind the fridge that went off when the room filled with gas. So we know how your apartment blew up. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? And the main character is like, oh, how dare you? That was my entire life in there. The couch, the IKEA furniture, the artwork, that was me. That's like, it wasn't just my material possessions, like it was an extension of myself. And so he's trying to cover his ass like, nope, it wasn't me who blew up the apartment. And the inspector was like, yeah, all right, well, don't leave town because you're still a person of interest, bud. So I think what's more interesting here is the whole reason the whole reason why our anti-hero here blew up his apartment was because the material possessions he had um, were imprisoning him. It was a hollow shell of an existence he created for himself. It was an example of passive nihilism. It's like, my life is empty. I don't have, I'm not aspiring to higher values in life. I'm not going to self-actualize. I'm so depressed, and there's just a void in my life I can't fill. So I'm going to cope. I'm going to mask that emptiness in my life with consumerism. I'm going to buy the IKEA furniture that's made from the indigenous people of God knows where. I'm going to, buy the latest iPhone. I'm going to buy, really nice fashionable clothing. I'm going to have a really attractive haircut. These things are not bad to value, but if you're valuing it to cope with the fact that you're living a purposeless, vacuous existence, that's a problem. And so that's been contrasted here with him trying to say, actually, no, those things were me. They were very purposeful, right? I mean, it was my purpose to accumulate those resources. It was meaningful for me to have those particular pieces of furniture. It wasn't just the apartment that blew up. It was a part of me that died in that explosion. And so he's acting. This is not true. He does not believe a word of what he's saying, but he's weaponizing it. And so I think people, like, this is just a personal note. I think it's important to have an experience like this, like that deep, dark, nihilistic depression where you just kind of like get lost in the void, and then you stare at the void and it's like, wow, like I'm just in the dark and there's no way I'm getting out of here. And eventually you do get out of it. Eventually you do get out of it. And when you do get out of it, you are much wiser for it because you realize, oh, that was not a unique experience. Other people are also having that experience. And what's happened in the novel is Tyler is weaponizing that experience. He's weaponizing it. And this is an example of it. He's trying to fool people into saying, no, no, that was really me. That was the part of me that got lost in that apartment. But in the novel, the weaponization is much more, other than telling a lie about no one died, right? It's just an apartment blew up. Instead of telling a lie about like covering your tracks in arson where no human being was harmed, this idea of weaponizing the void in people's lives for your personal ends, your personal gain, goes very deep and very dark in this novel. It concludes with Project Mayhem. And so in the real world, you see this with political movements, with cults, with religious movements, with people trying to sell you things to fill the void in your heart. And so it's good to go through this experience because then you can play defense in the world. You can see, you can pierce through the bullshit that people are trying to sell you, and you can see things for what they are, and you stand on much firmer ground because for having gone through this experience. And so, yeah, that's all I want to say about this chapter. It was a short and sweet chapter. A couple of really cool ideas here that were explored in this chapter. So if you made it this far, it means that you found value in this video. And so I ask that you let me know that by liking the video and subscribing so you don't miss future videos. And yeah, we can continue our journey of Spanish mastery together. Until then, ciao.